station is no longer private.
Oh. Huh. Yeah, I guess I'm on YouTube.
I always thought about like streaming conferences on like twitch.com, but I just like had an aneurysm every time I thought of like Twitch chat and just like the memes and the terribleness.
Oh, but William, how would the APA charge $300 to attend those?
I can't believe that, like, it's not even the fact that like they're charging $300. It's the fact that like they won't even put up the keynotes or the main talks afterwards on YouTube. And I'm just like, give me a break, man. It's the same in Australia. I think the last conference in Australia that I didn't attend, well, it was cancelled, but last year was like the AAP was like $400 just to attend, and that's not including like accommodation or flights, and like traveling around Australia is fairly expensive already because everything's so far away. But you're sending
that's
like,
what they cost now. My God.
but it's there's no reason why philosophy conferences are so expensive, except for like the renting of like the rooms at the university or whatever it is. At least that's how they do it in Australia, where they rent. The university rents back to the department the rooms that they are using for the conference. Yeah. Capitalism 101.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been like the last year and a half or so, I've been doing like some student government stuff at our university, and it's kind of hilariously inefficient, the way that finances are managed or, mismanaged on a public university system. It's just like what you're saying with departments having to trade money between departments, and it is ridiculous. I mean, it's just the worst kind of. It's not a system anybody would ever design if they were to sit down and do it now. It's clearly one of those things just accrued over the decades.
It's like the duct tape. It's just a series of structures put together over the years with duct tape to hold it all together. And
Okay, it does look like we're gonna have to have a new link, so just bear that in mind. So if we'll send you, if you did want to hop off of here and watch on YouTube or share with a friend, we're gonna tweet out a new link and also update the website. Sorry about that.
It was good thinking to double check that ahead of time. I will say it's been interesting to hear people's voices as opposed to simply like those of you, most of you I haven't met or spoken to. There's been at least 2 or 3 people who I thought didn't know they had that accent. That's kind of cool.
I like this. So AG and I met, like, we had been like friends on Twitter for a while and then met at a conference. God, that was 2 years ago now, AG. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But it was like we had this like very weird, and also Jonathan Ichikawa is not here. That's also how my friendship with him started. And it's been fun to see this like trend continue today, where it's like very interesting cultural phenomenon or like social phenomenon where you don't like really know. It's not like we all sort of like stumble over our words when we say like we all know each other or like I know this person, because it's like weird. Like Twitter does seem to be like distanced in a way, but then when you actually do interact with them, people that you've known from Twitter, it's like there's all this common ground that happens like when you're talking to old friends. It's like it's just wild. It's just like a very interesting social like circumstance that I think is really rare outside of the online world, or outside of Twitter actually. Like the way that Twitter just like fosters you hearing each other's like random thoughts all the time in the way that you would if you like hung out with them all the time. It's just it's cool. I don't know.
A year ago or so, someone from my German network started a DM group chat with about 20 people, and for almost a year we've all been writing in this group chat, and then shortly before Christmas we had a Zoom meeting, and it was just, the conversation was exactly the same. It was so cool to see that there is just so this, you're so trained to think that online isn't real and stuff, and then you but then you realize, yes, it has been real all the time. We've just became all friends just through reading each other's stuff over the course of the day. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, I've given up basically trying to demarcate between friends on Twitter and friends in person, like friends in real life, like whatever the other, I don't know. Like I just don't, I say they're just, I don't know, they're just my friends. Yeah. It's a lot easier that way without being inaccurate, I think.
It's not exactly a new phenomenon, really. I think what's probably new is how the pandemic has exacerbated. We're all a lot more on Twitter than we probably were a year ago. Mostly, basically, for the fact that there's nothing else to do. I mean, from my own experience, when Melbourne was in lockdown, for 4 months we had the toughest lockdown in the world, where I couldn't go further than 5 kilometers from my house, and the only reason I could leave my house was for grocery shopping for 4 months. And you know, there's nothing else to do. Like it was just like, well, I'm gonna scroll Twitter for 24 hours a day. But it's also like I don't know about the US, because your lockdowns have been bad lockdowns, but there's a I've started to feel like a kinship with sort of people in the UK who is now going through lockdown, a really tough lockdown, and reaching out to old people, old friends from the UK, being like, this is how you get through this, because it's a weird experience. It's weird.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Devon. Long time no see.
A very long time.
Well, what's 2016?
16. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Will visited.
I visited Colombia for a couple of months during my PhD, where I met Devon.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
It was great. Yeah, I love New York. New York's great.
Not as interesting at the moment.
Wow. I mean,
go anywhere.
For good reason.
Yeah. No, the COVID rates here in New York are pretty bad. Not as bad as some other areas. My sister-in-law lives in South Carolina, and they're very mask casual down there, and they're significantly worse than New York. But I mean, it's bad enough. So it's the best I can do is like get takeout from my local restaurant. Come back here, read, go on my treadmill, get more takeout, gain 5 pounds.
Yeah.
See, we weren't even allowed takeout. Like everything just shut down. Besides grocery stores, and it really, like, from the sort of political philosophy point of view, it really interests me. So we had like anti-maskers and like free liberation people, but like maybe like they would go out in groups of like 10 or 20, like very small, right? And I just like think of like the crazy focus on individual liberty in the US is like has wrecked your
Bill would be the
country.
only one who you know, but you can still pop in and say hi. No, just conversation.
Yeah, it's been weird, like being in LA, because LA is a hotspot right now, and like things are like, oh,
Hello. That's my partner, Katie, who also did philosophy at Columbia and also knew Will.
Just
So
saying
she
hi
was-
to Will.
oh, how cool! Hi, Katie, nice to meet you. But
One
yeah,
about California
it's
or
just
Southern California.
I mean, LA in particular is just, it's like the rates are skyrocketing in a really scary way. I actually stopped paying attention to it because there was so little I could do. I mean, it's weird because in my little world, I have literally barely left my house in 10 months because, you know, I was on fellowship for last semester, and I'm teaching online. My partner is here with me. Like, he also doesn't leave the house. So we just like have basically been in lockdown for 10 months, even though it's not been enforced. But like, it's hard for me to remember that most of even LA hasn't been acting like that. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there was someone I follow on Twitter saying it was a lot easier when everybody was on the same page, but now you're like seeing people in restaurants, and it's like the ghost of Christmas Present, just showing you how much fun you could be having when you're like one of the people who still, like, I've had friends be like, do you want to grab a drink? And I'm like, no.
It's like we sort of had that in Australia, where some of the states were very open and other states were having 300-400 cases a day. So in Australia, all the states locked their borders to one another, so you couldn't travel or do anything. And what that, there's like, I mean, there was already animosity between states, as there always is, but it sort of exacerbated to the I mean, Australia got off fairly lightly, Andrew. Like, at our worst day was maybe 750, but without that super strict lockdown that we had, like the epidemiologists were like, yeah, you know, like another variant would have occurred in Melbourne, and then you would have had the Brazilian variant, the South American variant, the South African variant, the UK variant, and the Australian variant. And so it's a weird, I like fucking, there were problems with the lockdown, but I don't, it's that weird thing of like, oh yeah, we'll just surrender all liberty to the government for 4 months, like to save lives.
I've got a couple of very conservative family members who probably just had heart attacks because you said that sentence.
Yeah, I'm in a small town in Ontario, Canada, but I'm from LA, and just like the response in Ontario hasn't been great, but I'm in a small town and I look at what LA is doing. It's like, what the hell is wrong with them? Just, oh my God. Yeah, just like, I got some older family members back home, and it's just like, just stay home. You're retired, you know. So that's good that you can just stay home. But
yeah, I don't know what the hell they're doing. It's
Yeah.
insane.
It also seems like what guidelines they have when seems completely arbitrary in California. At least from looking outside, it looks like there's no rhyme or reason to it.
It's going terribly in the UK.
Yeah, good
Really
old
bad.
Boris has made some great decisions over there.
Oh, terrible.
At least you're getting the vaccination distributed as from what I
That's
hear.
Hang on.
That's the
EU
only
is-
good thing that we're doing.
The German authorities are completely messing this up. Everyone's vaccination rate goes like, and ours is. Because I don't know what's going
You're in
on
good
there.
company, don't worry. The US is also not doing it right.
Yeah.
Germany had the great idea to take 6 doses out of one bottle, and it didn't really work out. So our vaccinations, they paid for 6 doses and just got mostly 4. It was quite mismanaged.
Like my favorite thing at the moment is the EU's trying to block the some of the vaccine companies from exporting the vaccine to Australia. It's just like we don't necessarily need the vaccine because we basically don't have any virus in the country. But it's just all the politicians are just now they're like, we're going to go to the World Health Organization and complain about the EU. And you're like, what's the World Health Organization going to do?
Yeah.
The EU decides what goes in and out of their countries. It's just like I knew this was going to. I started when the pandemic or everyone started. There was lots of like, this will like be the bringing together everyone, and I'm like, no, it's just going to be like every country for themselves, and it's basically that's what it's turning into. Fun times.
The vaccine collaboration at least was like some reason for hope until it like got,
I mean, the scientific stuff was good, right? Like science happened well. Then politics got involved.
How are things going otherwise? Well,
Yeah, pretty good. I'm surviving. Well, I just finished a whole bunch of marking. I've been marking like straight since the 16th of December. So like 1,000. Like 1,000 separate pieces of like work over like a month. It was insane. But yeah, seeing what happens next semester for work. I started a master's in data science for the LOLs, and just writing publications. We're trying to write publications. I got one recently, just came out in AI and Society about how GPS fucks our brain.
nice.
Yeah, it was a good project.
My
yeah.
grad advisor did a paper. It was for Wittgenstein conference somewhere that did a paper on kind of precisely that, about how GPS and not actively using our navigation skills ends up kind of rewiring things, and we don't really know how to interact with the world in the same way anymore.
That's basically exactly what our paper's on, but we used so Cass Sunstein's a big fan of saying that GPS is a great nudge. Like it's a brilliant idea of nudging, and we were just like, no, because of all these like implicit things that happen to your brain, it no longer becomes a nudge. You become increasingly reliant on GPS to the point where you can't actually engage in wayfinding properly without GPS devices. Like there's all this research about, you know, people following GPSs too closely to the fact that they drive off cliffs because they don't realize that the GPS is leading them down a non-existent road off a cliff. You're like,
Is this
man.
still happening, or was this a thing in the early days of GPS? I'm kind of surprised.
It continues to happen. Like people drive into lakes and stuff all the time. But because they become so...
Specific gag of that, I think, in The Office, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, where like they can see the lake and they're still going toward it.
It's because I mean, we use the sort of, we come enculturated into using the GPS, and the way GPS systems are designed sort of leads us to using them more and more. And so it's like Jonathan points out, if like you don't use GPS, you're way more reliant on just like, what's the word? Like landmarks, whether they be like, you're like, oh, I need to turn left at the McDonald's sign on this road because that's like the best way to get to back to my house, right? That's how the brain usually works with sort of wayfinding and stuff. Like we identify those landmarks in our journeys that like make it easier to get to our destination. But because we use GPS now, we're no longer very good at identifying landmarks when we need them.
On a related note, I'm TAing for a Foundations of Cognitive Science class this term, and we were talking about ways to like think about like hypothesizing about the mental states of like creatures like animals that are, you know, birds that navigate and stuff. And we were talking about navigating, and in my discussion section, I brought up MapQuest, and because I think MapQuest is like an interesting foil for like having a mental map, is like where you just got this like inflexible list of directions, and only some, like one or two maybe of my like older students knew what MapQuest was, and I was like, oh god. This is it. This is where it starts.
It starts when your pop cultural references are like 20 years old. Like,
wait, Jen, I think I'm older than you, and I don't know what MapQuest is. What on earth are you talking about?
Okay, so it was like the precursor to Google Maps. It was like, so boomers would, like, especially like my mom and my dad would, when we went on road trips or whatever, they wouldn't have a map. It's not like, so there's like the old style of map using, and then there were the people who would, like, MapQuest would, you input your destination from your and your starting place, and it would map you out in like a map, and then like put a little line on it, and then they would give you like a list of directions. It was like turn left here, turn right here, just like Google Maps does now, except you printed it out, like you had a hard copy of it sitting in, you know, with you, and your like your passenger seat person was holding it. And then if you made a wrong turn, you messed up, like God bless you, like you gotta figure it out. Like that piece of paper was not gonna help you out.
The interesting thing about like early Google Maps and MapQuest was like they give the distance, right? So they'd be like, after you turn left, travel like 500 meters. But it assumes that like humans are good at like understanding the distance they travel, which people are not. Like, right?
Yeah.
I could not tell you when I've traveled 500 meters in a car, let alone walking. It's just.
I also remember, I seem to remember MapQuest had really odd ideas about like what was a slight right or a hard right. Like, he like, is this? I don't think this even is a turn, but it's maybe is supposed to be a turn, or okay, it says a slight right, but this is like a 90-degree angle.
I think there's sort of like been overcompensation on that issue, because now there are directions. Well, if the road, you're on that same road, it's the only road. If it starts to veer to the right, it tells you that you're still on the right road. It's like, well, there's only this road. Yes, of course I'm on,
exactly.
on the right road.
And then you get nervous. You're like, wait, am I not supposed to still be on this road?
If people stop using GPS and just use their natural inclinations for navigation and wayfinding, you'd get lost less often.
I doubt that. I've literally gotten lost in a house before. My sense of direction is atrocious.
I've never lived in a big enough house to get lost.
I didn't live there, but I did. Somebody I knew did. It was.
Big houses can be
cardinal
confusing.
directions is very useful. You'll do a lot better if you can figure out your cardinal directions.
I can tell you which way the sun is, kind of.
That's actually probably that's enough information to figure it out. So.
I mean, really, it's between the ADHD and like I think maybe some like just cerebellum stuff or something. Like I literally like. If I end up in a navigating position on a road trip, like usually people realize like too late that it was a mistake to put me there.
My problem is
warn them.
My problem with navigation is I've never had a driving license, just because I've never had an opportunity to learn to drive a car. And so I'd be navigating, but the problem is I don't have a concept in my brain of like how soon the driver needs to know certain pieces of information. So I'll be like, yeah, we need to turn right here. And they're like, I literally can't do that now.
Yeah.
So when I was like 14, my father thought that I was really bad at navigating. So we made a road trip through Sweden where I was just navigating with a map, like a real physical map. And I, of course, never drove in a car. So in the beginning, I always directed him like 5 minutes after he should have known it. So we should have gone right like 5 minutes ago, and then he was pissed. And then after a week or so, we drove 3 weeks through Sweden. I got the hang of it.
I mean, it's a good way to practice, right? He maybe shouldn't have got angry at you, like learning how to navigate. Reading a map or is a useful resource to have, even for
I
the
like to
younger
think
generation.
that your dad learned something as well.
Yeah.
I kind
He
of
was
miss
very invested.
the lack of availability in gas stations here in the States of like really thorough maps now. They just assume you have a GPS. So, I mean, what I did, I just made a rule to myself that you'll use the GPS once, you'll figure out how to get there. And if you have to go there again, go on your memory, because, you know, I don't want my brain to sort of like lose that skill. Mm-hmm. And second, at least the GPS app that I use, it drains your phone. And it's like, you know, 2 miles before your destination, it dies. So it's like useless.
That last 2 miles with all the small turns that you really need to know is the important part when you never want it.
I once destroyed my phone on an archaeological dig and had to navigate 3 states using a gas station atlas. Took a wrong turn and got lost on back roads in Tennessee for half a day. It was a bit of a rough learning experience.
But an adventure that you can. I mean, if you get lost in interesting places, right? That's the great thing. I don't know what Tennessee's like. I've never been to Tennessee.
I like it personally, but I like a lot of rural places. I think they're fun to drive around. And it's also kind of funny because every 5 minutes you see a church in the rural South here. So
were you also like sightseeing? Like what happened? Because I figure if you're trying to get 3 states away, you're probably just staying on like a main highway. Was it like getting back on the highway or something that was an issue, or how'd you get lost?
So I was actually doing my archaeological field methods class with a different university than I was attending. And the university I was I was doing my field school at was the University of the South, Sewanee, and it just doesn't have any major roads that go to it. And where I was living in Kentucky at the time, the 3 states was hyperbole, but still, where I was living in Kentucky at the time, the quickest way to get from Sewanee to where I was living was basically nothing but state highways and back roads. So I was basically relying on a Rand McAlley US Atlas to navigate back roads.
I would have just I would have just like never gone home, I think.
I mean, there were easier ways I could have done it, but I was like, oh no, I can do this. I drove this way using the GPS. I can use the map to get back. I know what I'm doing. And then I got lost for half a day somewhere in Tennessee. It was a beautiful drive. I was just like, oh, I think I missed my turn 2 hours back and there's nowhere to turn around.
Yeah, the problem with traveling alone is like you have to like stop to look at the map and then remember like 10 instructions for like, okay, and you're like, okay, I'll be able to travel for like 2 hours with these 10 instructions. But then if you like fuck up and then it all relies on your memory. And then like that's the thing, right? It's like overuse of GPS erodes your memory, erodes your brain doesn't have to use the hippocampus as much, and so like those sorts of skills get lost, and then you have to rely on the GPS even more because you don't have the memory, the ability in memory, or the capacity in memory to remember the things you need to remember.
Does anyone else just appreciate the aesthetics of maps too? I think even if they were on an equal par, I think I would still prefer the map just because it's, I don't know, like I've got maps hanging on my wall, shit like that. I just think they look cool.
Maps are cool.
When Google Earth was a new thing, we used to just enter random addresses and look at the satellite image.
Like kids still do that. My kids just discovered Google Earth, and that's like their new favorite game is going around. And there's a lot more on it now too than there used to be. There's all sorts of street views, and in some like public buildings, you can walk through like the White House and stuff. You can go on Google Earth and get like an inside tour of things. So yeah, that's still a thing.
Yeah, I mean, so schools are closed here at the moment, so I'm having to homeschool our 7-year-old, and an attempt at a geography lesson just turned into us stalking ourselves on Google Earth.
Have you played GeoGuessr? Which is it's a wonderful, and there's some people on the internet who are just like fantastically good at it, but it's basically a site which uses Google Maps, and it'll drop you in a random part of the world, and you have to like decide where you are in the world.
Cool.
It's a really cool geography tool for teaching about geography. But there's a guy on YouTube or probably Twitch who like tests himself to like see, and it'll be just like the most random thing in the world, and he'll just be like, "Yeah, we're here," and you're like, "How do you even guess that?" It'll just be like a back road with trees, and he'll be like, "We're in Mongolia," and it'll be in Mongolia. And you're like, what?
Nice.
It's amazing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a like you can do a lot of it's a site, GeoGuessr, but you can do a lot of different things. I think it's really good for like just general teaching geography.
Yeah.
I've got to say, go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, people who are really good at that are just incredible. Like, I think the best I can do is like if it puts me somewhere where there's a sign, I can be like, okay, I can narrow it down to like 35 countries.
It's either Spain or Latin America.
I was just gonna say, does anyone remember when Google Earth used to have the Easter egg if you tried to get directions from someplace in the US to someplace in Europe, and it would actually instruct you to swim across the Atlantic Ocean? Like it would have you drive to Boston, swim to France, and it even gave like a time estimate of like 3 months or something.
So good.
I was just gonna say one of my favorite things about Google, like the Google Street View, is how sometimes it will be years between updates in certain places. Like a couple months ago, I was trying to show a European friend my childhood home, and I haven't lived there since 2011. And when I went to the Street View, I realized that it was still like my dad's Jeep parked in our driveway, and that the trees that the new owners had cut down were still there. And it's just this amazing little moment of, oh my goodness, I remember all of this.
That's awesome when that happens. So, like, damn.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, it was kind of that surreal moment of just finding something you completely didn't expect to see.
We're coming up on 3 minutes till the hour. So if you want to run to the restroom or grab a coffee or any water real quick, I recommend that you do that now because we'll be starting shortly. I'm going to do that. Okay. Oh, nope. I am not on video. There we go. Okay. Hi, folks. Welcome back. If you are just joining us now, we're about to start the colloquium session of the Cogito workshop. So this will be our last session of the day. Before we do that, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements, and then Cassie will introduce our colloquium speaker. The first thing is that afterwards, at least I will be hanging out for at least an hour, maybe like have a beer and hang out. So you are welcome to do that. This Zoom channel will still be open. If you're not in like a wacky time zone and you know it's time to go to bed, feel free to hang out. Speaking of time zones, thank you all of you for being here today. I mean, this is like spectacular in a way that I don't think either Cassie or I kind of envisioned. We hoped it would be, but I don't think we imagined it would actually be. It's just been amazing, and thank you especially for people who are tuning in, both in the Zoom and on YouTube, like from really far away. From not just Southern California where I am, but from the US in, like I said, really wacky time zones. It means so much that you're here, and I hope that you've had a wonderful time so far. I know that I have. Another thing is that we are happy to announce the date for our next CodeTutor workshop, which is going to be March 20th. That's going to be on the way that ancient philosophy can help us face contemporary problems. So it's going to be called OK Boomer. Can the ancients tell us anything about today? So if you work on ancient philosophy or are interested in it, please submit or encourage your friends to submit. And also, if you are in a position to be interested in sponsoring that event or run an organization that might be interested, we have a small amount of overhead for the website hosting and for other sorts of technology things like Zoom and like paid Zoom programs to extend our reach and our accessibility resources. And we would be very grateful for any help that you might be willing to give to keep this sort of thing going, because we're really hoping that we can keep it going for a while. Okay, and with all that being said, I will turn it over to Cassie.
All right, perfect. So we have the honor of having Em speak for our colloquium presentation of our inaugural CodeTutor conference. Em specialized in the historical philosophy of language and mind. She's an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Missouri. She earned her PhD in philosophy at University of Southern California, represent for some in the room. And before starting graduate school in philosophy, she studied art history in Bucharest, Romania, and for her BA, and then in London, Canada for her MA. In her spare time, she enjoys the simple pleasures in life: gardening, hiking, running in sandals, watching films, going to art shows, all that jazz. So I'm so excited. I've been hearing quite a bit about Mary Shepard recently, so this will be very exciting to hear even more from a different source this time. So without further ado, turning it over to Em.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you for organizing this workshop. I'm really happy to present here. And I don't know, the source might be still adulterated because Chris and I were in the same initial seminar. So no offense here. Who knows? Maybe we're on the same page, maybe not. Okay. First, I want to share my screen. So am I able to do that? I haven't tried actually.
Yes,
no.
I'm going to make you a host really quick.
All right, thank you.
Should be able to now.
Okay. Oh, come on. Okay, you should be seeing something. Yeah, I'm very technologically not advanced, so I cannot make a PowerPoint. I actually know how to make a PowerPoint, but anyway. Mary Shepard on the role of proofs in our knowledge of the external world. That's a huge title, but I'm inspired by her. I mean, this is the title of one of her books, Essays on the Perception of an External Universe. And, you know, these are and other subjects connected with the doctrine of causation. And this one was published in 1827. And the other one, I won't even attempt to say the full title. You can find it at the end in the reference section, an essay upon the relation of cause and effect. And I'm going to refer to these ones throughout the talk. Mainly, the talk is designed to focus on the one published in 1827, but the other one will be featured as well. Okay, so, you know, who is Mary Shepard and why do we care about her? That's a good question. I mean, these are good questions. She was a philosopher who lived from 1777 to 1847. I know you can find this on Google. I always do because I'm really bad with names. She privately trained with tutors in Edinburgh and then was part of the philosophical circles at Cambridge. William Whewell was one of her friends, and he used one of her books as a textbook in one of the classes he was teaching at Cambridge. So he was actually using one of her books in order to teach Kant, which I find amazing because she's not a Kantian, she's anything but. I mean, she might have been aware of Kant somewhere in there. Apparently there is a footnote where she talks about a French translation from Kant. Anyway, she doesn't fit a canon, so let's extend the canon and care about her. But her writings engage with and extend some of the topics that were primarily addressed in early modern philosophy. Her work includes several articles and books. The best known ones are, as I said, the essay on the perception of an external universe and other subjects connected with the doctrine of causation. And there's a new edition that appeared last year. You know, it was edited. There's a scholarly edition now done by Antonia Lolordo. So if you see references to Shepard 2020, just know that, well, it's basically 2 centuries too late. And then the other one, it's an essay upon the relation of cause and effect. And as I said, I'm going to call the first one EPU and the one on relation of cause and effect ERCI or ERCI. If you hear me say ERCI, that's my way of saying that. Okay, so the topic of my talk today will be her views regarding the role of reason in our acquisition of knowledge of the external world. So basically, she's responding to Hume and then criticizing Reid and Stewart, who are other philosophers who were responding to Hume, to this idea that you end up in a sort of skepticism with regard to the external world if you don't actually have a way of reconstructing all your knowledge based on reasoning or on demonstrative reasoning, basically. So Hume famously says things like, oh, this is an inference of habit. It's not an inference of demonstration. It's not an inference of whatnot. I'm not a Humean. I'm not sure what he says actually. But, you know, it should have been an inference of reason, and it isn't when you think about causation, and that's a bad thing. So Shepard is trying to actually restore our confidence in reason and in our reasoning powers. And she thinks that we can demonstrate things about causation, about the relation between cause and effect. However, I argue that reason, although it plays an important role, it doesn't play a foundational role in justifying our knowledge of the external world, according to Shepard. She thinks that certain principles enable us to make the required inferences for acquiring knowledge of the external world. And the 2 most important such principles are the so-called, the causal maxim, everything which begins to exist must have a cause. And this is something that most everyone in early modern philosophy gives a statement of under these under these words more or less. So you find this formulation in Locke, you find this formulation in Hume, you find this formulation in Reid, and so on. And the other one I'm going to call like causes, like effects, which just means that similar causes must necessarily produce similar effects. And the interesting bit here is that she thinks that reason helps us with knowledge, with knowing these two principles. Okay, what I'm going to argue is that these two principles in particular are first principles. They are the axioms, if we want, of any science about the external world. And it's controversial whether Shepard believed that these axioms are known via reason and justified via reason, or via something else, namely intuition. The text is generally open to interpretation on this issue, since Shepard seems to say both that reason and intuition allow us to know these principles. And here I'm drawing a distinction that might not be very clearly drawn in the early modern era between, we have intuition as this capacity of our minds that's going to give us things immediately, almost like perception, but with regard to knowledge. And we have reasoning that includes demonstrative reasoning and sensitive reasoning if you are if you are Locke, sorry, or probable reasoning if you are Reid. So intuition and reasoning are supposed to be separate, but they're not exactly separate all the time. If you look at the texts, the distinctions that Locke originally draws are between demonstration and intuition. These are the things that he cares about, and reasoning should be only dealing with demonstrations, not exactly with intuition. So I'm going to follow this kind of distinction. But if you are an early modernist and you feel, this is not right, people are not talking this precisely about these distinctions. Okay, I hear you. And, I'm trying here to just keep things as straight as possible. So basically, if you are coming from later 19th century, from Frege, and from Kant, why not, right? Where, intuition is supposed to be that thing that gives you immediately knowledge about things of the mind. And it's not stuff that has necessary intermediary steps. So usually we say in mathematics, even nowadays, that we know the axioms of math via intuition. I mean, some philosophers of math say that, others, I don't know what they say. Okay, so I will show actually that Shepard should have said, so should have made the decision, should have pushed in the direction of saying that we know the first principles of any science in general, and both the causal maxim and like causes, like effects in particular, via intuition and not via reason. These principles are basic, foundational, and more importantly, self-evident, and thus justified in other ways than by demonstration. Justificatory demonstrations of these principles are neither required nor even possible. So I'm taking a very Burge-Fregean line here with regard to axioms and first principles in general. Reasoning about such principles can help their self-evidence shine through in certain cases. Their justification are being justified in believing them, however, does not come from this reasoning. So we can think about them and we can construct certain arguments about these principles in order to convince ourselves, or in order to, illuminate them to us as first principles, but the justification for them does not come from this type of reasoning. Okay, so I haven't said anything about the competing interpretation, but let me tell you quickly what are the advantages of my interpretation. I learned this by doing philosophy with David Kaplan. You have to say fast what you think about things, because otherwise you're going to go into the weeds and no one knows where you're going to be in 5 minutes from now. So here are the advantages of my interpretation. I think that on the interpretation that I'm offering, Shepard's system turns out to have the internal resources to dispel a type of circularity that Fantel 2016 identifies in it. So he thinks that we cannot prove all propositions building up a system of knowledge without going in vicious circles. And I mean, this is not a super original objection. Any kind of system that is trying to say that you need to give justifications, reasoned, demonstrative justifications for your all the propositions in your system will be open to that kind of circularity. And I argue that we don't need to prove all of these propositions. According to Shepard, some of these propositions are known in other ways. I will talk more about how exactly these axioms are known and what does it mean to say that we have intuitive access to them, but not a lot more. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A, but it's half a mystery at least. But in any case, if successful, Shepard's project does more to stave off skepticism. And I know that, the new Hume is not a skeptic. So, the old Hume supposedly was a skeptic. And Shepard's project turns out to be quite successful against that kind of skepticism. Then arguments given by post-Humean anti-skeptical champions like Thomas Reid and Douglas Stewart. Reason helps us justify our knowledge of the external world once our intuition illuminates the necessary axioms of this knowledge. Whereas in Reid's view, reason was not to be seen as the primary engine of knowledge at all. So, he's one of the first commonsensical philosophers, and he's thinking, no, I'm not going to prioritize reason here. Perception gives me knowledge just as good as reason. And people thought, yeah, but you're not actually responding to Hume in that respect, because he wants, you're just going along with Hume. So you're not showing that his brand of skepticism is bad or anything. So I think that the way Shepard approaches these problems can help in that regard. Okay, so here's the agenda. The paper proper has 3 sections. In the section Knowing the World, I explain the structure of our knowledge of the external world according to Shepard. Our knowledge is highly dependent on our prior knowledge of the causal maxim, and like causes, like effects. The causal maxim is a foundational principle that grounds everything else. And what we're trying to find here is what exactly grounds the causal maxim. So it turns out, and I agree here with other commentators, that given input from the world, you can prove or you can show that like causes, like effects, based on input from the world and the fact that the causal maxim. So the causal maxim is the foundational principle here in her epistemology. But you need like causes, like effects in order to actually know particular instances of stuff going on in the world. Okay, so one thing that I'm interested in is finding out what exactly grounds the causal maxim. And I use this word very liberally. I use it with a commonsensical dictionary meaning, whatever that means. I'm not talking about grounding in any robust metaphysical way here. I'm just thinking, what exactly anchors, what's the rock bottom for the causal maxim itself. Okay, the next section, Reasoning and Demonstration, discusses the standard interpretation of Shepard and the problems that arise on that interpretation. And the last section, Reasoning and Self-Evidence, details my proposal that Shepard's causal maxim can and should be a first principle, an axiom in a system of knowledge of the external world. Okay, so, sorry, I made this big. Knowing the world. The first 3 chapters of the EPU, so this book, right? We're just talking about this book primarily. Prove that we have knowledge of an external, independent from us and continually existing world. several things are required for the acquisition of such knowledge. First, sensory perception is at the basis of this knowledge. I mean, she doesn't call it perception, but I don't know, trust me, this is what I think she means. Everyone is able to notice via their five senses that they have certain perceptions which are as of external objects. Shepard argues that we know that such sensory perceptions are caused by external things. And the reason for this is twofold. First, everything which begins to exist must have a cause, so the causal principle does heavy lifting here. Second, neither the sensations nor the individuals themselves are such causes, she thinks. She goes through some arguments for that. Then, by continuing this type of psychological observation, we may note that in classifying certain of our sensory perceptions as being like or unlike others, we must realize that these sensations stand in certain relations to one another. So we get particular things, but also they are related to other particular things. And actually we can find out these relations if we analyze the particular sensations that we have in our minds. So, you know, I get an impression, a sensation of this huge mic that I'm using, and I realize that it has to be connected to my computer in order to work or something like that. So it's not enough to get just the sensation itself. Moreover, we appreciate that similar causes must necessarily produce similar effects, so that whenever we are presented with a candle, for instance, we will have a perception as of a candle. We are thus able to pair the right causes to the right observed effects by using this second law of causation, like causes, like effects, and an analysis of the relations among our sensations. And all of this happens quite under the radar. So if she were into doing empirical psychology, she might have written some laws explaining exactly how this comes about. But the idea is these are the things that are needed in order to get out of the perennial problem that empiricists have, namely that you just see one shade of red, another shade of red, another shade of red. How do you abstract and how do you know? How do you generalize if you don't have already this idea or this innate principle for generalization in your head? And she thinks you have something like that. You have a way, an ability, a capacity for analyzing the relationships between these shades of red. And I don't know, something, you realize that there's also redness in general, not just individual reds in the world. Shepard's theory of knowledge is housed in her more general philosophy of mind. So everything starts with the mind. And, you know, I called her an empiricist already, but, you know, basically that's at the beginning of her empiricism, the idea that the mind is the thing that needs to be first and foremost analyzed and thought about, and then that's going to give us what we need for constructing a system of knowledge, a good epistemology. By learning how our minds work, we understand what justifies our knowledge of the external world. Our minds, if fully working, right, typical minds, typical human minds, are equipped to derive this knowledge from interacting with the world. And it is a substantial claim that to acquire knowledge, of the external world, we must be using the relation of cause and effect. Shepard argues for this empirically, taking developmental psychology seriously, indicated by a representative following passage, but the representative passage here, you have it on your handout. So first principles are the perceptions of the corollaries, inclusions, or necessary relations of our simple impressions. And infants who have not a capacity fitted to generate such perceptions are born idiots. Excuse her language, please, but she makes a good point here. Idiocy appears to be little else than an incapacity for further perception than what resides in the immediate impressions created by the use of the five organs of sense and the power of motion. Children's understandings take notice of, namely their latent powers of observations enable them to perceive, certain simple relations, including in those ideas of sensation, which are determined to their minds by the organs of sense. So the idea is that if you are lacking in certain powers of analyzing the relations between the sensations that you're getting from the world, then you're very much stuck to the present, and you're not going to be able to construct a particular type of knowledge in order to give you access to the world and the needed access to the world. She thinks that this usually doesn't happen. So, in typical human beings, we do have that capacity, and that's how we solve the problem of generalizing and of making similar predictions based on, like causes, like effects. So this bit, this is just a, being carefully observant of developmental psychology, but psychology can only take us so far. And Shepard aims to show that our knowledge of the external world, which depends on our knowledge of the relation of cause and effect, is grounded, is supported by something more robust than Hume's inference of habit or Reid's natural instinct. The success of her system depends on her being able to supply answers to epistemic questions regarding the relation of cause and effect. And here are two questions that are very important. Do we know that this is a necessary relation, cause and effect? Shepard believes so. She offers proofs, demonstrative proofs, right? To support this belief. These proofs aim to show that the causal maxim and like causes, like effects are true. Like causes, like effects may, with some restrictions, be derived from the causal maxim, as I said before. So the proof for the causal maxim is thus of utmost interest. Shepard must show that the causal maxim is justified, and she must also show that we have access to its justification on the assumption that the proof of a proposition, if correct, constitutes the justification of that proposition. So otherwise, she thinks we don't have knowledge. She's not very clear on testimony and trusting the experts. I think she may think that all of us need to have access to the justification for the causal maxim in order to be said that we actually know it. Okay, the other question that is important to answer here is the following. How is it that we know the two laws describing the relation of cause and effect? Most everyone in the secondary literature argues that, according to Shepard, it is by demonstrations that we know these principles. By using our reasoning powers, which allow us to offer demonstrations of the causal maxim, etc., we are in a position to know that the relation of cause and effect is necessary. And this, in turn, allows us to acquire knowledge of the external world. Okay, now all of this is prima facie supported by Shepard's stating that it is by reason that we know both the causal maxim and like causes, like effects. And before I cited a little bit here, but let me give you the full things, the full quote. That reason, not fancy and custom, leads us to the knowledge that everything which begins to exist must have a cause. So, reason leads us to the knowledge that the causal maxim is true. And that reason, again, not fancy or custom, forces the mind to perceive that similar causes must necessarily produce similar effects. So reason seems to be what gives us this type of knowledge. But the question I have is, how exactly are we supposed to think about reason, right? I argue that Shepard recognized, this is all before Frege, right? So it's before logic. I don't know. I mean, no offense to people who study Aristotle, Cassie. I mean, I know we had logic since Aristotle forward. I'm just trying to make jokes here. But I argue that Shepard recognizes that a causal maxim is foundational and it must be taken for granted in the absence of any kind of justificatory proof. And I also argue that in passages like these ones, where she stresses that reason gives us some sort of knowledge, Shepard might be interested more in psychology than epistemology. It takes a certain kind of rational work, reasoning about such foundational principles, to recognize that they are foundational and hence self-justified. So we need to apply our mental abilities, and in that, and those consist in reason, according to her. At least this is my claim. She offers a working definition of reasoning that leaves it open whether it is by intuition or demonstration. Remember, this is the big contrast, that we know such propositions as the causal maxim, and this is another quote from her. The very act of reasoning consists in drawing out to observation the relations of things as they are included in their juxtaposition to each other. So you need to apply yourself and get to these relations, right? Not just the things that, I mean, in looking at the demonstration, you need to understand how you move from one premise to the next and then to the conclusion. You need to understand the laws of inference. And this is the model, this is a paradigm, but this type of application of mental application can be used for other processes and to obtain other things. So reasoning might, and see, I am equivocating here, and I show this paper to people and they are pointing this out. Oh, but you talk about reason and then about reasoning, and you need to make a decision. And I don't know exactly how to make a decision here, because she talks about reason and then about reasoning, and probably reasoning is, something larger that includes demonstrative proofs, but maybe it is to be the same thing as drawing inferences and nothing more. So demonstrative proofs, I'm not sure. So, if you can help here, I would be really happy. Okay, so reasoning might help us appreciate that we have intuitive knowledge of principles like the causal maxim, since not all reasoning, namely exercise of reason, need be inference, according to her. And we see this in a passage where she writes as though the knowledge we have of the causal maxim and of like causes, like effects is indeed intuitive, right? Here's another passage. Otherwise, external objects would each in their turn begin their own existences, namely a relation of ideas would exist uncaused, which by the youngest minds is not embraced from its involving an intuitive contradiction. Such is the latent reasoning silently generated in the minds of all men from infancy. So she thinks that once babies start to actually be made aware of patterns and such, I don't know, let's say 3 months old, 4 months old. I mean, infancy, what did infancy mean at the beginning of the 19th century? I don't know. But this is consistent with developmental psychology today that attributes to, babies this idea that they recognize patterns. They start recognizing pattern by a certain point in time. And I don't remember, I think it's 4 months, but it's before object permanence for sure. And it's needed for object permanence. So, you need to already start this machinery of recognizing relations and being able to remember these relations and being able to use them. And then if you are interested in giving epistemological notions here, definitions and whatnot, whatever we do when we do epistemology and building natural sciences, you will have to go back to this machinery and analyze how exactly it operates to connect you to the world. Okay. So as the next section shows, there are problematic consequences of arguing that Shepard offers demonstrative proofs that justify our knowledge of the causal maxim. So, primarily when I do philosophy, when I do history of philosophy, I try to give the best interpretation of the text, the most charitable interpretation of the text I'm working with. And I think that if we think that Shepard uses reason and, gives demonstrative proofs and whatnot, we end up with problems that we can get rid of if we think that Shepard argues that intuition is the source of it all. Okay, so moving on to reasoning and demonstration. Did Shepard demonstrably prove the causal maxim and that there is a necessary connection between causes and their effects. There are several answers in the secondary literature, and the secondary literature is growing. So, this secondary literature is from this summer. So maybe there are more answers. But Paoletti, in an article in 2011, replies with a resounding no. Paoletti talks, however, about the second causal principle. So she thinks that like causes and like effects is a principle that Shepard does not demonstrate. Here's a quote from Paoletti from page 51. Shepard did not demonstrate that cause and effect are necessarily connected. She rather took a deterministic view of physical phenomena for granted, which allows us to affirm that similar events are produced in similar circumstances, and that this is true in the past as well as in the future. So, and then Paoletti doesn't explain what she means by this idea that she took for granted. This can be a technical term, taking for granted. And I'm not sure that Paoletti uses it like this. She just means, okay, so she didn't investigate too far. She thought, oh, determinism is fine. And then this is how things work. Then Lolordo in 2019 seems to reply with a less resounding no. Again, she talks about the second causal principle, which like causes, like effects, which seems to not be in need of demonstration. Its truth is determined analytically, thinks Antonia. We just need to understand what causation is in order to understand that like causes will always lead to like effects. Right, but then I want to talk about, the causal maxim. So is the causal maxim, how is that viewed in the literature? Well, Bolton, in 2 articles, she argues that Shepard proved the causal maxim. And this proof has a lot to do, again, with how Shepard understands the notions of cause and effect. And these are 2 block quotes that I hope will not be very confusing. They are to me, but okay, let's stay on task. We care about cause and effect, nothing else, right? So this is from the other book from Urchi, in which she only talks about cause and effect, basically. I mean, it's on a relation on cause and effect. A cause is such action of an object as shall enable it, in conjunction with another, to form a new nature capable of exhibiting qualities varying from those of either of the objects conjoined. This is a generation or creation of qualities not conceived of antecedently to their existence. An effect is the produced quality exhibited to the senses as the essential property of nature so conjoined. And then from EPU, the idea is very soon learned that it is a contradiction to suppose things to begin of themselves, for this idea is occasioned by the impression, the observation that the beginning of everything is but a change of that which is already in existence. So the beginning of everything is but a change of that which is already in existence. And so is not the same idea, the same quality as the beginning of being, which is independent of previous being and its changes. The 2 ideas are therefore contrary to each other. Changes therefore require beings already in existence, of which they are the affections of qualities. And Bolton spells out the contradiction like this, basically, and this is a quote from Bolton 2010, to suppose something begins to exist without a cause is to suppose an essential property exists and the object which it is essential does not yet exist, right? So this is the idea here. This is the contradictory that Shepard is trying to provoke in us to see. And then Bolton 2019 clarifies, Shepard evidently understands the beginning of a thing's existence to mean an action, which is the very notion of a cause as evidenced by the Urchi passage quoted above. And my comment here is that the proof for the causal maxim could probably be structured as a reductio that obviously results in a contradiction once the terms of engagement are fully specified. So suppose that a thing can come into being without being caused. Is this possible? Blah, blah, blah. No, then, the causal maxim is true. Okay, Fanto, in 2016, also argues that Shepard proves the causal maxim, but he points out that there are two insurmountable problems with the proof. Well, the proof itself, he also says that depends on Shepard's idea that the beginning of the existence of an object is an action of an object, namely an essential property of that object. And then again, to suppose that an essential property of an object can exist without the object itself is contradictory, just like Bolton discussed. He also thinks that the proof depends on Shepard's understanding of objects as masses of qualities and on the synchronicity thesis, namely the idea that causes do not precede their effects, but are synchronous with them. And I don't want to go into that too much in my talk or the Q&A. I mean, we can. This is the thing that Shepard is most famous for, if she is famous for anything. The fact that, causes and effects are simultaneous. So there's no first cause, then effect. No, everything is existent at the same time. I'm only mentioning this in the interpretation that Fanto puts forward because one of the problems that he identifies with Shepard's system is connected to this idea of simultaneity. Namely, he thinks that, okay, there are two problems. First, Shepard's discussions of synchronicity comes after her argument for the causal maxim. And this is an issue because it may seem like her views of synchronicity are partly derived from having established the causal maxim itself, right? So it's reasoning in a circle. Here's what Shepard says: before I proceed further, I wish my reader to grant the causal maxim because I mean to make use of it in my further reply to Mr. Hume's doctrines. So it seems like synchronicity depends on the causal maxim, and our knowledge and demonstration of the causal maxim depends on synchronicity. So that's a big boo-boo. The second problem that Fanto identifies is that there might be complete discontinuity between each moment and the next. So Fanto argues that this is not something that Shepard wants to allow, since she claims that indeed the objects that conjoin to be causes do exist before this conjoining. She's saying, I quote, "The objects whose union is necessary to a given result must certainly exist antecedent to such an union." And this is needed to guarantee a causal link between each moment and the next. I mean, we still talk, each moment and the next, but causal links have to still be there. Once causal relations are synchronous, we lack an argument that such links exist. And Shepard seems to just stipulate rather than demonstrate that there is causal linkage between each moment and the next. And this is a problem, right? I mean, if your demonstration relies on this and then this is hanging loose, not good. Okay, given these issues, I propose we start anew. If the best we can do to support the causal maxim is to offer indirect reductive proofs that have the air of triviality about them, maybe we should reconsider the role of such proofs in the economy of establishing a system of knowledge. And this will allow us to better appreciate the exact role of reason in our acquiring knowledge of the external world. Okay, so reasoning and self-evidence. Excuse me. Shepard believes that to acquire knowledge of the external world, we need more than just the bare information provided by our senses. As I said, we need to analyze the bare information, right? And here's again that quote, part of the quote from before: "Even children's understandings take notice of certain simple relations, including in those ideas of sensation. And this they very soon do as readily as they distinguish by which organ it is that any new impression of sense is conveyed." This is, for Shepard, part of the psychological development of typical children. And we will not be able to acquire knowledge of the external world unless we also have access to certain first principles. Again, the quote from before, first principles are the perceptions of the corollaries, inclusions, or necessary relations of our simple impressions. And infants who have no capacity fitted to generate such perceptions are born idiots, blah, blah, blah. Now, she doesn't explicitly say that such principles ground our knowledge of the external world, but I believe that it is fruitful for her overall project to think that they have this role. So think about these first principles, as I said, as the axioms in math and as axioms in any kind of natural science. People were big on axioms at that point in time, everywhere, not just in math. So she uses this notion of first principle. She uses the notion of intuition. She is a Lockean, a declared Lockean, who, as I said, makes this distinction between intuitive knowledge and demonstrative knowledge primarily. And then I think it's fruitful to look at one of the most detailed accounts of first principles that Shepard had access to, Reid. So, okay, Reid is my first love. Of course, I'm going to bring him in. So what exactly are first principles and how exactly do they work to give us anything? And how exactly are we supposed to think about them? Okay, so here's a passage from Reid. They, the first principles, are no sooner understood than they are believed. The judgment follows the apprehension of them necessarily, and both are equally the work of nature and the result of our original powers. There is no searching for evidence, no weighing of arguments. The proposition is not deduced or inferred from another. It has the light of truth in itself. And of course, you know, the light of truth in itself. Any and every reader of Descartes knows what that means, sure. I still don't know, although I'm teaching that. So anyway, but the idea is, right, you have this way of getting at first principles, and because they bear their self-evidence on their sleeves, you just know them, right? Such propositions are called axioms, Reid continues, when they are used in matters of science, and on whatever occasion they are used are called first principles of common sense. This is also from Reid. And these first principles, appreciating the truth of these first principles, is the work of nature and the result of our original powers. Okay, now, similarly, Shepard believes that unless we are born with a capacity fitted to generate such perceptions, the first principles, we are gravely lacking in cognitive power. Despite their differences with respect to many other issues, for both Reid and Shepard, recognizing the truth of first principles and using them to derive knowledge of the external world seems to be an integral part of typical human psychology and epistemology, if we are interested in developing any epistemology. The causal maxim then is known by intuitive reasoning like an axiom of mathematics. There is no other way of making intuitive reasoning explicit. We appreciate the truth of a particular axiom because it is obvious, self-evident, self-justified. We cannot offer a deductive direct proof of an axiom. First principles, as Reid says, do not admit of direct or apodictical proof. We can sometimes construct a reductio, also known as an indirect proof, to confirm but not justify our belief in certain self-evident principles. And if you're worried that I'm making things up, that no one believes in logic, look at intuitionistic logic and intuitionistic mathematics. I know it's not super common these days to work with those kind of ideas, but that's what is at the ground zero in intuitionism, the idea that indirect proofs are not as good as direct proofs. You're not proving things with indirect proofs, right? I mean, you're just reaching contradictions. Why should a contradiction prove anything? Such proofs, however, so reductios, can help us understand which propositions should be classified as first principles, as Reid again points out. There are certain ways of reasoning, even about first principles, by which those that are just and solid may be confirmed and those that are false may be detected. A first principle may admit of a proof ad absurdum. In this kind of proof, everyone knows, which is very common in mathematics, we suppose a contradictory proposition to be true, we trace the consequences of that supposition in a train of reasoning, and if we find any of its necessary consequences to be manifestly absurd, we conclude the supposition from which it followed to be false, and therefore it's contradictory to be true, right? So this is a common description of how a reductio works. Shepard seems to employ this type of reasoning about the causal maxim. She offers a reductio, so I agree with Bolton and Fantel here. She offers a reductio in which she invites us to assume that something can begin to exist without it being caused. Nothing more than understanding the terms is required for us to appreciate that it is an absurdity to claim that the contrary of the causal maxim can be true. But this is not a way to justify the causal maxim. This is a way to reason about the first principles that is available to anyone who has the right abilities, according to Shepard. This type of reasoning about a first principle, about the causal maxim, can answer a certain type of skeptical challenge. Why should I believe that this very first principle is true? By supplying a proof that confirms our belief in it, we can be assured that everything else resting on the causal maxim is firmly grounded from an epistemological point of view. And Shepard, as a declared Lockean, doesn't confuse intuition and demonstrative reasoning. She seems to think that we need to offer some additional support for the causal maxim to help us understand, to help us appreciate that we are entitled to make recourse to this principle in our theory of knowledge. Okay, replying to Fantel objections then, how does this help? Well, to the threat of circularity, what Shepard offers is not a demonstrative proof meant to justify the causal maxim. It's at most a spelling out of the details of an analytic argument. Analyticity goes both ways. It is symmetric. There is no metaphysical or epistemic primacy to synchronicity in such a case. So, the causal maxim doesn't depend on synchronicity, and the synchronicity doesn't depend on the causal maxim. And to the worry regarding the discontinuity between each moment and the next, well, Shepard's view is open to this on Fantel's interpretation, due to the requirement of further epistemic grounding in the course of the alleged proof of the causal maxim. Fantel believes that the proof doesn't go through without recourse to the synchronicity thesis. Well, this may be so if we're trying to give a deductive proof with the result of demonstrating the causal maxim. There is, however, no requirement for further grounding of premises when spelling out the details of an analytic argument. On the assumption that Shepard is reasoning about an axiom, or offers ways for reasoning about an axiom, which requires a particular analytical understanding of causation, synchronicity plays no role. It may turn out that cause and effect are synchronous. It may indeed be the case that the universe is required to be deterministic for all we know. I know that's not true, but it may, I don't know. These, however, are further metaphysical claims which are not required for understanding why everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Okay, and briefly to conclude, in this presentation, I discussed what is the structure of our knowledge of the external world according to Shepard. I argued that, according to her, the causal maxim is essential for acquiring this type of knowledge. I explained that she thought that we know the causal maxim via intuitive reasoning, not demonstrative reasoning, or at least that we should interpret her writings like that. Shepard was well aware of Locke's and Reid's take on intuitive, demonstrative, and sensitive/probable knowledge. The most relevant in this discussion proved to be Reid's way of spelling out what axioms are supposed to be and how we can think and reason about them without actually demonstrating them or justifying them with our demonstrations. This allowed me to argue that Shepard doesn't actually try to prove the causal maxim, but that should not make us think that our knowledge of the external world is structured inductively, as Bolton suggests, and grounded in the causal maxim in the highest degree. Thank you.
Awesome. The one shame, well, there are lots of shames about only doing things online, but you can't hear the like round of applause from everyone. But please, join me in displaying the applause emoji for M. That was wonderful. So we're gonna take a 5-minute break. So we will, thank you, M, for that was like wonderfully, beautifully timed. We will, it should make a sound effect when everyone uses the applause emoji. That's very clever, and it probably could be easily, no, nobody wants that. Okay, so yeah, we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock Pacific, so that's 5 minutes from now for Q&A. Hey, Em, is it okay if we, do you want to keep sharing, or would you prefer to end the screen share?
I don't know. What do people think? Is it, I mean, let's stop sharing. And if anyone wants me to share again to look at something, and we can do that maybe.
Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, whatever is best for you. I think it's like, at least when I like to see all the people, but
Yeah.
it also can be nice to be able to pull stuff back up. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, I usually make handouts because people have handouts then, and then they can bring all their objections in full force.
Let's see, Cassie, did you? Oh, yeah. I can do it. We hadn't decided who was going to chair this actually. Okay, so yeah, what we'll do is we'll use the raise hand function. So for anyone who happens not to have been here for the other sessions, if down and you have and not familiar with Zoom, if you go down to your bottom sort of main taskbar, there should be a reactions and then raise hand. So if you do that, you'll pop up on my screen in an order, and we'll just go from there. Please remember, if you can, to lower your hand after you're finished asking. And if you, let's also implement the finger hand distinction. Cassie, does that sound good? Okay. So if you have a new question that's like completely on a different thread of questions, you should raise your hand. But if you have a question that's like kind of directly related to the question that was just asked, and you'd like to be inserted into the queue to keep the thread going on that question, you can do the thumbs up to be the finger. Okay. We have questions. Cool. Yay, Devin.
Thank you very much for the talk. So I guess one thing I was wondering is on the reductio ad absurdum point, I was a little unclear because, you know, that's ambiguous between whether you're deriving an absurdity or whether you're deriving a contradiction, because in the latter case, like, that would be, at least nowadays, considered a demonstrative right. It's proved with certainty that the thing you were assuming was false. And I want a little clarity on what she's doing, which kind of reductio is supposed to be happening here.
Yeah, thank you. So she's definitely deriving an absurdity rather than you know, a contradiction per se. But she talks sometimes about, you know, you're going to recognize the contradiction in this absurdity that I'm showing to have at the end of actually assuming that stuff can start begin its existence uncaused. And it is true. I mean, okay, I can say a little bit more about how reductio proofs are thought about these days. And for anyone interested in that, I will refer them to an article by Penn Maddy. I mean, a two-part article about how set theory and set theory axioms are actually justified. And people are, you know, I mean, that article is a few years old, but there are ideas that were floated about. They were thinking, oh yeah, so this is the set of axioms. I'm going to say that these things are self-evident. And then what do you mean by self-evident? Well, this, that, and the other. Oh yeah, that's not going to work for some of these axioms. Okay, what do you mean by self-justified? Oh yeah, so, oh, okay, so you need to actually come with ways of trying to contradict them, but then you can't. But of course, you don't want to say that those ways of contradicting them, the axioms, are going to justify the axioms, because you have to start somewhere and you can't move in a circle. So the same kind of ideas are being, well, were being floated about in the past century in philosophy and in philosophy of mathematics and in set theory. And you know, of course, I mean, when we teach logic, of course, we tell students, and this is something actually autobiographical and very interesting. When I teach logic, I like, you know, there's this program that I use and it takes you slowly and you go through derivations. And finally, we get to finally, I don't know, in the third week of classes, we get to indirect proofs. Awesome. Those are the best, right? You can prove anything. Students are so miffed by them and stumped by indirect proofs. I don't know if any of you had this happening to them as a student. I don't remember. I don't know. Logic was very hard when I was a student. That's all I remember. Or as a teacher of logic. But my students are usually so upset with indirect proofs. They don't get the idea of trying. What do you mean? You're just assuming a contradiction. You know, you're assuming the contrary of the thing that you want to prove to be true. And then you reach a contradiction that is totally unrelated or can be totally unrelated. And that proves that the thing that you assumed is false. So the thing that you wanted to prove is true, is correct. Why is that a thing? And they have such huge problems with understanding what that is like, and they don't have these problems with understanding how other, you know, direct proofs work, or, you know, sub proofs work. And then that made me consider this idea that indirect proof is somehow fishy. Okay, and it's not, I mean, of course we like indirect proofs, and not, you know, not every logician or every philosopher of math or every set theorist thinks that indirect proofs are bad. Definitely Frege thought that indirect proofs are awesome. Those are the things that you should be using, no problem. And they justify, I mean, for Frege, they do justify, you know, they're just demonstrations that should be used as regular demonstrations. However, I'm proposing that, you know, that's one group of philosophers of math and of logicians. And, you know, there are these other groups. And maybe we should think about ways of understanding how to think about axioms, you know, justification, or believing them on the force of extraneous to the system evidence. So that would be a way, you know, of processing and a way of thinking about indirect proofs that is not going to justify them. I don't know. You know, eventually what I want to get out of this is that those very bad problems that Fantle identifies can be avoided if only we don't think that she wants to demonstrate them in the sense of justifying them, but demonstrate them in the sense of showing that you can reason about them. And, you know, that's available to her via Reid, and she did read Reid, and she criticized him extensively on many other things. She doesn't talk about this aspect, but she obviously knew a lot of how he approached this kind of thing. And, you know, Reid is saying, okay, some first principles, some of them may allow a reductio in this sense, and, you know, that's going to confirm somehow the belief that you have, or, you know, help you convince someone else. Other principles are not going to do that. And the skeptics are going to come forcefully at you and say, see these principles, you can't convince me of anything regarding them. And he's like, okay, so here's how you argue against the skeptics. It's ridicule. You just bring skeptics to ridicule or something like that. So, you know, these are all, I mean, putting the joking aside, these are all different strategies that you may have to bolster confidence in certain propositions that those might be actually first principles. And they're not foolproof at all. Again, going back to Frege, we all know what happened with the basic law number 5, right? I mean, that's destroyed everything. And people have been trying since then to reconstruct logicism in different other ways, and they haven't succeeded as far as I know, but I don't know that very well. So, but I mean, yeah, I mean, reductio, I'm all for it. I'm all for indirect proofs. She doesn't say that, I mean, she tries to come up with an absurdity to show us that this is an absurdity, a contradictory absurdity, not just an absurdity coming up of something additional. And then I'm using that read and take to try to circumvent the problems that Fantle sees in the system if we go the other way.
Awesome. Philip?
Yes. Well, thanks for this really interesting talk. I hadn't heard about Shepard at all. I was a bit confused when you talked about the way Reid talks about first principles and how she talks about first principles, because from the way you presented it, it sounded a bit like Shepard thinks of first principles as first in the genetic sense of acquiring them, the very first abstractions infants learn about, and Reid seems to think of first principles in the sense of foundational axioms. Did I miss anything, or is this the correct way of putting it? Because in that case, I'm not sure. Well, both talks seem to be very different from one another, and I'm just not sure how they are supposed to relate to one another. Could you explain that a bit?
Good, that's a great question. What are first principles? So in my, I'm a Reid scholar if I'm a scholar of anything. So in my interpretation of Reid, derived from Van Cleef's interpretation of Reid, mostly, who was my advisor, the idea is that Reid is one of the first developmental psychologists and philosophers interested in developmental psychology. So he lays the foundation of, together with Berkeley, of vision science, like a robust science in psychology. First principles in this sense for Reid are developmental, first and foremost, right? So they are genetically informed, as you put it, or genetically determined. The idea is that they are the laws that we can sit down and write down of our minds functioning in order to give us certain kinds of knowledge, certain kinds of anything, certain kinds of orienting us into the world. So this is the entry point for Reid into philosophy of mind and into epistemology. And he calls these things first principles of common sense and common sense is not something that blah, 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 Kant says, oh yeah, just go on the street. No, there's anything wrong with that, but it's not that. It's something a lot more precise. It's this internal sense or internal capacity that we all have. That's why it's common. It's in common with, it's human nature, that allows us to appreciate certain propositions as true when entertained, when understood and entertained. So the propositions that this capacity for understanding first principle, the propositions that this capacity gives, illuminates to us as true. So this is the Cartesian mind in play in Reid. Then he transfers, the terminology, and he says, okay, these propositions that we see immediately as true, as being true upon hearing and understanding them, these I'm going to call first principles, but it's a derivative term. So the first principles are these laws of the mind that allow you to understand that, one of the first principles of common sense is that whatever I feel happening to me right now is actually true, and there's a general and a particular reading of this kind of thing. And when I interact with other minds, I am sure that there are other minds. So for Reid, first principles are both developmental, primarily developmental if we want, but also they are the foundational propositions that we understand to be true. And, there is another point of controversy and of debate, Humeans are especially upset with Reid and Reidians. How can he write about first principles after Hume? Like, what is he talking about? Innate knowledge all over again? And no, these propositions are not known innately. We have the ability to understand them, and we have the ability to entertain them. And once, understood and entertained, or entertained and understood, we get to basically know that they are true by intuition alone. And now, Shepard talks about first principles mostly in this psychological way, in this developmental way. I mean, unfortunately, that's really the only passage, the one about first principles, that tells us that we generalize things, that I could find in her 2 books, in her writings mainly. So, again, this is the way I know history of philosophy is I'm reconstructing a lot, and I'm putting a lot of words in the mouth of my philosophers. So the idea is, do we have any enough contextual evidence, so not textual, direct textual evidence, but contextual evidence, to think that you might have meant something by first principles that is sufficiently like Reidian first principles, such that when we understand them like that, we get out of the problems that Fantal points that her system has, if we think about these things as being demonstrated. And maybe the answer is no. Maybe what I'm doing here is bogus. I'm happy to say that. I think the idea that she says, look, I know Locke very well, and I'm Locke's true heir. And I think that if we read Locke carefully, we are going to be able to respond to Hume's challenges with regard to causation. And then the fact that Reid thinks that, oh, Locke, awesome, he makes this distinction between intuitive and demonstrative and probable knowledge. And we can use intuitive knowledge in a lot of our disciplines. In morality, we can use probable knowledge in science and morality, and we do amazing things. And then I'm saying, okay, so Shepard comes along and she read all these things, and she's thinking, she says something about first principles that is of the same ilk as what Reid says about first principles, developmentally speaking, so psychologically, developmentally speaking. And then I'm saying, okay, given all these things, can I reconstruct a system that is sufficiently like Shepard that I can attribute it to her and is actually coherent, not, vicious circularity doesn't ensue, as Fantal is saying that would ensue if we think about those things as being demonstrated.
Okay, awesome. Philip, okay, I couldn't tell if you wanted to keep going or not. Okay, let's go with Jonathan.
Okay, cool, thanks for the talk. This is a different kind of a question, I guess. It's more sort of external than internal in a way that'll make sense when I ask it. I'm a philosopher myself who is not particularly oriented around historical figures. So my main point of engagement with work in this genre is in my teaching. I intro level epistemology and metaphysics courses, and I'm teaching Descartes at the moment. I'm teaching some Hume next week, just little bits and pieces. So my question is just, would you recommend Shepard in this kind of a context? And I guess one of the things that I might be interested to know is does this material come in sort of bite-sized pieces that might be digestible to undergraduates? No.
I think actually, I don't know. So that's a great question, Jonathan, but I don't know. I don't teach Shepard. So my way of becoming knowledgeable of Shepard was a seminar in 2018 that Don Garrett gave, and Chris was one of the co-seminaries, and we had Daniel Collette and Ruth Boker and oh my God, someone else, Chloe. But the idea is that I taught after that, I taught a seminar, so a grad seminar for students, and the students at the University of Missouri in my philosophy classes, the grad students are very smart, but not very knowledgeable of the history of philosophy. So, you know, we just did Shepard, we didn't do Descartes, we didn't do Locke, we didn't do anything. And whenever she referred back to Locke, Berkeley, or Hume, we would look at the texts. So you can definitely teach her as a commentator on Locke, Berkeley, or Hume. But I don't know. I mean, students have already troubles with understanding Hume on causation. Well, what do you mean there's no causation? And then, oh, no, causation actually is simultaneous. Let me tell you about Mary Shepard. It's even more awesome than there is no causation. No, the causation is actually happening all the time in the same way. And I don't know, basically go back to Parmenides maybe to understand, you know, the whole that moves by not moving. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I didn't find any ways. I'm not teaching her at all in my undergrad classes. So I teach, you know, I teach survey modern philosophy from Descartes to Kant, and I teach women philosophers, but not. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I mean, the best way to look at this is the collection that Margaret Atherton has, and she's probably going to have, so it's, so it's Margaret Atherton, Women Philosophers, Early Modern Era. I mean, again, I think it's so, and you know, Atherton includes passages that are relevant and where people are in dialogue with canonical names. So I teach things from there. I teach Anne Conway all the time, responding to Leibniz, and I teach Dr. Coburn responding to Locke. But yeah, Shepard. Maybe it's also because I never get to Hume in my survey class, except very, 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 very little bit of Hume. And then there is no more time to actually talk about anything like that. But
that's useful to hear. Would you say this material is primarily like would require to be in dialogue with these other canonical figures? It doesn't make sense to just study it by itself.
As I said, I think it makes sense to study it by itself at the grad level, but I'm not sure at the undergraduate level. But what do I know? I mean, I teach Descartes' meditations in my survey class for half the semester, and then there's no time to do anything anymore. So I don't know. And I'm not even a rationalist. I'm opposed to rationalism, 100%. So, but I mean, so another thing that I find a bit problematic is that, no, you know, let's bash Mary Shepard. Her way of writing is very Victorian. And for me as a non-native speaker, that was really hard. But by the time I came to reading her, actually, I had spent a lot of time and I know how people write in that era, but it was kind of like she's going in circles and I don't see why. Like she's going in laces and circles. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I really think like I want to hear from what Chris thinks about this.
Yeah, Chris had a follow-up, so that's perfect.
Yeah, thanks. So I would say I have kind of, I wouldn't recommend trying to teach her to undergrads unless you can dedicate a seminar to her work. I'm doing my senior seminar on Shepard right now, but we're starting off by reading Berkeley and Hume. Because I think if you haven't covered Hume on causation, then basically everything she's doing is not going to make any sense at all. Because I mean, I think we both agree the causal principle is pretty foundational. And so without kind of motivating that through Hume and Berkeley, it becomes very, very hard to make sense of what she's doing. So I don't know. I mean, I think the selections in the Atherton collection make her seem even wackier than she really even is. And she's weird. to be sure. But I don't know, it kind of seems out of context. So that was just kind of my follow-up on that one.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thanks, okay, awesome. Tom, you're next.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I thought this was really interesting. So I wanted to just ask about some of the broader implications for other sort of similar topics. So it struck me, I mean, you mentioned this kind of Burge-Frege analogy at the beginning of the talk, and it struck me that that general structure is going to apply to other, or could apply to other early modern sort of topics of interest, right? Other things that Hume worries about, or that, you know, show up for someone like Kant in like the Antinomies or something. And so I was thinking, are these topics, is this approach supposed to generalize to other topics? Like the one that struck out to me initially was God, right? Like this idea that you can, the justification for belief is not on the basis of reason, but you can give these kind of reason proofs that make you think, though to give you reason to think that there's something sort of axiomatic about this belief, something like that. So I was wondering if this is only restricted to the case of causality, or whether it has kind of application elsewhere.
No, it's not restricted at all. I mean, this is quite a general way of thinking about first principles and about this notion of proof itself. So a follow-up paper that I want to write at some point is, what exactly does proof mean, right? And again, I would like to, probably I would start by looking at Reid, because at least he makes a distinction. I mean, at least for him, proof becomes a technical term. So with Hume before him, inference, was just moving from one idea to the next in your mind, whereas inference, an inferential proof for Reid, is a robust term that actually means, deductive inference. And then, go from that and look more closely at how people think about proofs these days. I mean, I was happy enough, I had the privilege of taking classes with Burge while I was in LA, and the jokes he was making were something like, oh yeah, so Frege really wants to sit down like the mathematicians, right? So Zermelov, the others, Gödel, oh yeah, Frege, this guy who really wanted to sit down and write all the steps in between. Why do we care about that? I mean, I see it, I just see it. And then that's the natural language of math. And, yeah, sure, this is a proof, like 2 steps. And yeah, you need to fill out 100 more, but sure, you could, because you kind of see them, right? You see them. So that idea is a very general one, exactly, right? So what exactly do we consider even to be a proof? And then we have this further distinction between direct proofs and indirect proofs, and how they are supposed to work, and why they are supposed to work. I mean, again, when I teach logic, I use this program, again, developed by UCLA by David Kaplan, where, he's not an intuitionist at all, but you cannot move. I mean, it's a rule that double negation translates to negation, and you always have to go through the double negation rule in order to actually get the derivation correct. To get the derivation to work, to get the computer to say that the derivation is correct. If you don't go through the double negation rule, you're gonna miss steps. So again, this idea of indirectness comes there, and there's a little bit of a hedge even in that kind of program, in that kind of teaching baby logic. So definitely this can be applied to something more. And so, the idea would be, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking, particularly in Shepard and in Reid, So does it like, it sounded like, maybe I misunderstood this, but it sounded like you were suggesting that Reid applies this to other minds maybe too. But so I was wondering if Shepard explicitly uses the same form of argument to deal with like other sort of Humean problems or other empiricistic problems.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, Reid has a list of principles of common sense, of contingent truths that is numerous, and a list of principles of common sense of necessary truths, which is restricted to 2 or 3. Causation is among them. And then Shepard, to my knowledge, doesn't really apply this to anything else. I mean, she's very focused on I mean, okay, when I say to my knowledge, really it is to my knowledge, because she talks about God and, you know, and and other things. So she talks about our knowledge of God and our knowledge of our minds. And, you know, as Chris was saying, if you actually look at at what she says, it's becoming more and more complicated and more and less transparent what she means. So there, for instance, she's not a dualist. It's just nature that has some sort of 2 aspects, the mind and the physicality, but those are not really robust aspects. And I'm not exactly sure how this would help. She's not, to my knowledge, really, which is limited, she's not trying to demonstrate anything else, because she thinks that once you have a robust understanding and a way of justifying the causal maxim and maybe even the other causal principles, then everything will flow from there. So we'll just get out of, or you're going to be able to construct other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at least with respect to God, it seems like if you have the causal, or especially if you have both, sorry, I can't remember the 2 terms you used, but if you have both of the versions of the causal thing in there, it seems like you could get some stuff about God out of there through, you know, like cosmological arguments or something else, right? So I can see how that would work, but that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, she has a cosmological argument, I think, about God. I don't know, it's a morass, really, going... Sorry, yeah. I actually like her a lot, but it's really hard to read and understand what she's saying. And I'm really not used to doing philosophy with almost no secondary literature. So that's another thing. I mean, there is freedom. You can say whatever you want, but on the other hand, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so shall we move on to Michael?
Thanks. So I'd just like to ask something about the, can you hear me? Yeah. I'd like to ask something about the principle that causes are simultaneous with their effects, because so Fantol's objecting to her argument for the causal principle on the grounds that it appeals to that, I think. And the idea is just that it's a really silly view that causes are simultaneous with their effects. And you're talking about how it would lead to a kind of Parmenidean picture on which everything happens all at once. And you can sort of see how if something happens at 2 o'clock and that's going to cause something that happens at 3 o'clock, and then you have the cause, and I mean, how do you get from one to the other? Of course, it's meant to be simultaneous. But it seems to me there might be a way of understanding it which doesn't seem particularly strange at all. And it's just like, because something has to start happening, it needs to be caused to start happening. I can't remember the exact formulation. I think it included something like begin to exist or something. But you have a billiard ball and it hits a billiard ball, and then the cause and effect thing, which is simultaneous, is just at the moment of impact, and it's impacting and the other one going off, and that's simultaneous. But then it doesn't need another cause because it's on its way doing its own thing. And then it hits another one later on. And then you don't end up with this Parmenidean picture. You end up with a fairly sort of straightforward, commonsensical picture. It might not fit with a modern understanding of how this stuff works, but it's not, it's not Parmenides or I mean, I don't want to be unfair on Parmenides, but it's not ridiculous. It's not everything happening all at once. So I guess what I want to ask is it sort of, I mean, do I have it right that it's the kind of everything at once objection, which is how it works? And is it, I mean, are we sure that that's how Shepard is understanding simultaneous causation, rather than it being just a sort of billiard balls thing and things, you know, causes and effects? It doesn't have to happen all the time for things to sort of happen.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, very good question. I do not understand simultaneous causation at all. So if anyone can explain this to me, I would be really happy. So Chris, but the idea is, so as far as I can tell, I mean, okay, let me start again. I still don't understand simultaneous causation, but here's what Shepard is saying, that causation is following this kind of picture. There are two objects that come together, and their union, they're coming together, the action of coming together, their union, causes another quality of another object to come into effect. And it's really interesting, and Lolordo has written about this, that the examples that Shepard usually gives are from chemistry. So usually people, when talk about causation, they talk about physics, the billiard ball, right? Mechanics. But Shepard goes back to the idea of chemistry, and she talks about combustion. So she's saying, okay, what happens with combustion? You have fire and you have wood, and they come, you know, there's a conjoining, and the moment that combustion happens is the moment when this conjoining happens. So these two are simultaneous. And in some way, the two objects are not the causes, right? So before this comes into occurrence, the conjoining, the coming together of the objects, they are not to be thought as being the causes in any way. The cause and the effect is the combustion. The coming together is seen as a cause, and the combustion, which is the same thing, is seen as the effect. And now the question arises, here's why I don't understand causation for Shepard. And, you know, I looked at Humer's simultaneous causation too, and that's not helping a lot, unfortunately. And that's why, you know, my Parmenides star was relevant, because how exactly did the first union come into being, right? And that's where everything is simultaneous with everything else. If you think about that, God is the creator and God made everything move, right? But God is under the eternal time. He's not under the the regular, this happens now, this happens later time. So on God's picture, which seems to be the real metaphysical picture for Shepard, everything really is simultaneous all the time. But even that doesn't make much sense, because what does time mean if you think about it under eternal descriptions? And then she's saying that, you know, basically there's this disconnect between metaphysics and epistemology. And when we do psychology/epistemology, and when we do epistemology, we are very much influenced by our psychology, and we are used to thinking about, there are the effects coming, I don't know how to show on Zoom, there are the causes, and then there are the effects. And she's trying to help us understand that metaphysically that is not correct. The correct picture is where you have effects and causes being simultaneous. But then, I don't know, I mean, have I always lived like this from the beginning of the universe? I mean, I know there are other pictures in metaphysics, the metaphysics of time, and, you know, pictures of creation, and when we talk about possible worlds, and when we talk about fictional worlds, and so on and so forth, where people think, yeah, you know, the characters in Harry Potter, and I'm sorry to bring about this novel, but I still kind of like it, unfortunately. Anyway, you know, I mean, they have already been necessitated with the first moving of the world, and they have already existed in some sense already, because they are necessary creations, because the world has gone in this way, blah, 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 up until this point. So it is a very deterministic picture of physics and of the world that Shepard employs, and that a metaphysic like that is supposed to employ. And again, Huemer has, Michael Huemer has a paper on simultaneous causation that tries to get out of that idea that you need that, simultaneous causation necessitates a kind of deterministic picture of the world, deterministic physics. But I'm not sure I understand enough of that to actually speak to it. So.
Chris, do you want to hop in with your follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, I can pop in for a second. I think you're right about virtually all of that. That all sounds perfectly great. The one thing I think that adds a wrinkle to it is in her discussion of the nature of time, she's like explicitly Newtonian about it. And so the simultaneous causation thing seems to be, I think, at least in tension with her views on the nature of time. And so there is something really funky about the sort of chemistry example, right? But the chemistry example can also be instructive, because if you think about a chemical reaction, it's actually a series of reactions kind of occurring temporally spread. And so maybe there's something that you can do there to sort of pull it away from what you might describe as a ridiculous Parmenideanism or something. That could help. I don't know, but I think she doesn't say a lot about time, but where she does talk about it, she talks about like a growing block kind of view. And so it's time is a thing that is objective and measures change rather than the other way around, is something that she says kind of over and over again.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. It's really cool to have the interplay between the two of you. I'm being greatly edified by it. Okay, Taha, I saw your hand earlier. Do you want to jump in or?
Hi. I don't know if you hear me. Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, I don't know if I missed it earlier during the talk, if there's any mention of, sorry. So there's a paper by Russell from the 30s that talks about intuitive awareness as the limit of, as the best you can get from empiricism about causality. And that sounded very similar to me. So I was wondering if there's any link in the literature between those two or not. I'm unfortunately not very familiar with the Russell paper either, so yeah.
Okay, so good. That's an awesome question. Here's why I know nothing about actually responding to it, but I'm part of this workshop of early career researchers where I read a paper by a woman, Sandra Lindblom, on Mary Shepard. And she was talking about acquaintance in Mary Shepard. And the thing that I wanted to point out was, wait a second, why are you talking about acquaintance? Acquaintance is this very clear-cut, technical term in Russell. If we talk about Russell, acquaintance, knowledge by acquaintance, of course, everyone knows that, right? So then I suggested this is a possibility, and I'm not sure that's tenable actually historically, but it might be. And I'm not going to investigate this anytime soon, unfortunately. I don't think I have time for this. But the idea was, okay, so Shepard was friends with Whewell at Cambridge, and he taught many people. And of course, Russell came after Whewell was dead already. But the idea is that there's this linkage, maybe, in which Russell read actually Shepard and borrowed some stuff. I mean, if you read the Moore, if you read Moore's manuscripts, and Moore, he annotates on Reed, but never cites him. And I don't know. I don't have any gripes with that. I'm fine. But the same might have happened, right, with how these ideas got into Cambridge University and then got absorbed into mainstream philosophy somehow. And yeah, that's That's all I know. I mean, I would like to look at the Russell paper. So if you can write it in the chat, I'm not familiar with that one. I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with that idea. So if you please can.
I'll do that now.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't know any more about that, but it sounds like I like this evidence because Sandra might be interested in actually writing that kind of paper. So, I would like that kind of evidence to exist somehow, somewhere. And it would be nice. It would be nice because, it's really annoying when you go to give talks, not in this in this context, but when people ask you, why do you do history of philosophy? And second, was Mary Shepard any good, or is she just a woman and we care to bring her into discussion because she was just a woman and extend the canon and blah blah blah, all that bullshit? That's an actual question I got on an interview. Anyway, so if if you can actually say no, see, it's those bozos, Russells and Frege and all that people and Moore and Wittgenstein who are not crediting all their predecessors. Unfortunately, it's their fault. And as one of the presenters today was saying, right, about Susan Stebbing, why did she drop out of history? Why is Moore just the thing and not Stebbing? And anyway, I don't want to rant on that too much.
Sorry, I'm so distracted by the idea of you being asked that in an interview. Shocked but not surprised, as many things with philosophy. Okay.
I think I shouldn't have said that. Sorry.
No.
It was not for the interview at this job, and I'm truthfully saying that. But yeah.
No, I mean, yeah. It's great. Okay, Devin, you want to hop back in?
Yeah. So I was curious. There was some stuff towards the end of your talk and also in your response to me that reminded me of sort of I don't know if you've read the Boghossian stuff on rule circular justification and suasive versus non-suasive reasons, right? So I'm trying to recall the details myself, but he has this thing about how do we know modus ponens, and there's some argument that basically we can use modus ponens to demonstrate modus ponens. That's fine because in using it, we aren't actually presupposing it. And then he talks about suasive versus non-suasive justifications, which is basically is this a justification that will appeal to someone who doesn't accept the way we're doing things versus, so a suasive justification is one that I could give to the skeptic and they would have to say oh yes, I see this. Whereas a non-suasive is one that allows me to, vindicate my usage of this principle, but not necessarily justify it to someone else. At that point, I just say I'm not going to talk to you anymore or something. And I was just curious if that's sort of the right model for thinking about the sort of argumentative move you're attributing here.
Yeah, it sounds about right. And again, I mean, I was at some point familiar with Boghossian stuff on modus ponens, but that was a long time ago. And in this paper on Mary Shepard, I'm using some stuff from Penelope Meri, an article from 1988, and Stuart Shapiro from 2009, and they talk about how contemporary philosophy of mathematics is thinking of, philosophers of mathematics are thinking about some of these things. And contemporary for them means, Gödel, Frege, Servalot, and so on. But I mean, even more contemporary people, of course, Bourbaki, right? That philosopher of mathematics. But the idea is that some of these things are seen as being not proven. I mean, some of these principles, some of these axioms are seen not as being proven, but as being somehow externally to the system reinforced, buttressed. And this is what, I mean, Maddie has very nice things. I mean, she goes through the whole thing with set theory. And basically, why did we choose those axioms to be the axioms? And Zermelo was saying stuff like, well, they helped me prove this thing, and then they helped me prove this other thing, and then they helped me prove this other thing. So maybe they are indeed the axioms, right? So their power of proof, their strength in helping prove other things allows them to be seen as foundational and as self-evident, or at least not provable anymore. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So I will look about, I look for this paper by Boghossian, because it seems like I want to say that there's something more going on, namely, you are using some sort of a proof to more than just, okay, good, to more than just confirm your belief, right? I mean, I always think about this with regards to the basic law 5. I mean, you know, that really sounds intuitive, right? In Frege's system. I mean, you can make it sound intuitive. I don't know. Burge makes it sound intuitive. I try to look at it in the Frege stuff and that. Yeah. Anyway, but the idea is, did he even try to find other bolstering evidence for that? It doesn't seem like that. I mean, he said it seems like the appeal of that thing was, okay, what do I need in order to prove these other things? Just like I just mentioned that Zermelo was doing with deciding that these are the axioms in a particular system of set theory, right? So I have all this stuff to prove, and it seems like if I only got this bit here, that would help tremendously with proving these other things. So it must be true, right? I can't see anything that is going against it, so it should, you know, it must be proved. So a move like the one that you described that Boghossian does is, you know, is something that maybe we should take on board very, very seriously. I mean, again, when I teach logic, I tell my students, oh yeah, there are the rules of inference, and you know, what are they exactly? How are we thinking about them? Why do we think that they are correct and they can be used in this manner? Oh, because they help you prove these other things. Great, yeah, great reasoning in a circle if I've ever seen one. But right, so this idea of trying to get something out of even the most basic laws of reasoning, again, will get us back to Descartes himself, right? So when he throws everything out the window in the first meditation, and then in the second meditation with the cogito, he's not actually giving us any kind of a deductive argument. He's giving us, you know, an absurdity, a contrariety, and you cannot deny its truth when you are thinking about it. So that seems to be a different kind of way that you're supposed to apply yourself to understanding the axioms, to understanding the foundational principles of anything. And then if you want more, you need to give a proof for the existence of God, which fails miserably, as we all know. Anyway, yeah, so I'm still teaching Descartes. The semester has just started and I'm teaching Descartes. But I mean, that's, yeah, so I get this idea of trying to prove the axioms, but of course, in my philosophical training, I do not care about that at all, because I am a Ridian, I am a common sense philosopher. These are the things that, you know, that my human nature gives to me. And if I'm getting everything wrong, if I am in the matrix, so be it, I don't care. I mean, the life that I live allows me to live it in this manner. And until, you know, until the red pill, blue pill comes about, I don't know, I'm rambling, sorry. I shut up. Anyway, did that in any way address your question? Sorry, Devin.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. If there are any other questions, comments, things that people would like to explore with Em while we've got her. Nope. Okay. Yeah, Chris, do you want to? Oh, no.
No, just that was excellent.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So please join me and join me and Cassie in thanking Em for this wonderful colloquium, our inaugural colloquium talk, and to all of our other speakers here who are still with us from this morning. Thank you so much. I really I can't say how pleased I am with how wonderful this has been.
And a big round of applause for Jen and Cassie for doing this. Yay! Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. It's been really fun. We're really excited. We hope to see you guys in March. We'll be back. Okay, so like I said, I'm gonna be here hanging out. I'm gonna go grab a beer real quick, but then I'll be back for people who want to chill out. And please feel free to put your if you want to put your Twitter in the chat if you have to go, or you can if you want to put it in your name up here if you want to sort of the phrase in my head right now is get more followers. That's not what that's not really what the desire I mean to attribute to you. But if you want to maintain our contact on the Twitter sphere, I encourage you to.
I have to go, so thank you so much for this opportunity. I love making people aware of Mary Shepard, even though she's weird and wacky and what's going on in here. But we need that. We need that. So thank you so much for bearing with me. And yeah, indeed.
Great.
Yeah, so great. Thank you. I have to leave, unfortunately, but thank you so much.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, BRB.